My project focuses on 24 different missionary texts, so all originally analyzed languages of the Niger-Congo area in Africa, and they were compiled by missionaries between the mid 1800s and early 1900s. So originally, they were obviously created for purposes of evangelization and conversion and colonization. So they're really problematic texts, but they're also really interesting in the sense that they shed light on a lot of really important questions about what has the history of linguistics looked like in the past, how have Western linguists dealt with and kind of adapted their own methods to document non-Indo-European languages, and obviously it also is kind of a really important but mixed and problematic legacy for BC as a Jesuit institution. So I originally was exposed to two of the missionary texts in a course taught by Margaret Thomas in the linguistics department. And I knew after working with with those two texts, that I really wanted to go deeper and see what other texts were in Boston College's holdings. All of the texts are actually part of Burns' ethnological collection, the Williams ethnological collection. So, yeah, after that class, I was really kind of hooked and wanted to see what else was out there. It happens that we have almost 30 French missionary texts at Boston College. And for me, the main goal, I guess, was to, first of all, to make them accessible because originally they were kind of sitting in the basement of the Burns Library, and some were uncatalogued, some were miscatalogued, some were really damaged and needed to undergo conservation. So the first step for me was digitizing the text and making them accessible and in a format that could be used by other people. The project actually makes use of methodologies from a few different fields. The first and kind of the main one, I guess, is the history of linguistics or the historiography of linguistics. So the frameworks that I'm drawing from that field allow me to look at the text and situate them in a broader context of describing languages, and kind of the historical tradition of grammar and dictionary writing. The second field would probably be literary linguistics. Now, these aren't literary texts, but they do contain prose sections, so insofar as they inflect literary practices, the field of literary linguistics has actually been really useful for different theoretical frameworks, to kind of give me some traction in analyzing the text. And then the final field that I've been drawing mostly on is the digital humanities. There aren't many digital projects in this field of the history of linguistics or missionary linguistics, so kind of all the other sides of the project, which deal with digitizing and organizing the text as kind of a database, that's all something that has to be done with other resources. So the project could not have been done without the library at all. I think at every step it's required either the help of Burns or O'Neill Library. Since from the beginning we were taking really old, fragile manuscripts and digitizing them, which obviously required the help of Burns and conservation work. And then once the texts were all digitized, then it moved into a phase of building a database or a corpus out of them. And that's relied really heavily on people like Anna Kajas and Ben Florin, who are both digital scholarship librarians. And I personally didn't have any expertise with kind of the technical back end of things. So for me, I was really, really grateful for all of their support. I guess the project has a few different goals. For me, the primary goal is to respond to a need for digital projects in the field of missionary linguistics, which is something that scholars have been talking about and kind of calling for, but no one's really stepped up to the plate, I guess. Um, so that's the primary goal. I think the some of the other goals include renewing attention to older linguistic texts. I think linguistics is an interesting field in that, unlike chemistry or physics, it actually does help to look at what the history of the field looked like. Um, but you have to do that in a way that kind of makes the materials more relevant and helps us kind of decenter our modern perspective, because the texts are very different from what a modern linguistic text look like. So drawing attention to older linguistic documentation is definitely one of the goals of the project. I think also, in general, it's important to contextualize missionary work. I think it's very easy to sort of write it off as culturally damaging and sort of really simplify the whole enterprise, and that doesn't really do a service to either the indigenous populations that it affects or to us as kind of people in the 21st century who don't really understand what happened, what took place on the level of language during the colonial encounter. For me, I've come away with, I guess tangibly, I've come away with a skill set that I didn't have before. So I've learned things like XML and TEI, and how to manage a digital project and work with people who have different talents and different resources. So for me, it's been really practical and I think important to my development as a researcher. Um, on a kind of less tangible level, I guess, it also, looking at older texts in a digital frame, in the frame of a digital project, I think raises really important questions about how you're representing information. How does the modes of representation affect what you're getting out of the material? And those are questions that are important to any field, I think, and not just for a specifically digital project. Yes, so I've already started to organize some of my research and present. I recently presented at a conference in Washington, D.C., and then I also plan to present kind of the final product, I guess, in September at the meeting of the Henry Sweet Society in the UK. In terms of my own plans, I'm sort of waiting right now. I graduate this spring and I'm waiting to hear about a Fulbright, which would be to continue this research project in Belgium, which is a place where missionary linguistics is really active, and the study of the history of linguistics is really kind of up and coming and important. And after that, I've been accepted to the University of Cambridge, so that's kind of the long term plan, is to do a PhD dissertation there.